Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Asaf Ramarowski, the Executive Director of SPME and ESMIA, and it is my privilege and honor to once again welcome you to our BDS webinar series. This afternoon, we have the privilege and honor, as always, to talk to our friend and colleague, Alex Joffe, who will be talking about the latest developments on BDS around the world. And as we prepare for the fall semester, there is much to discuss, not to mention the fact that as we get closer to the anniversary of 10/7 in October, how all this is impacting the campuses, how it's impacting local politics, and obviously the cultural elements that all of these, how all of this plays into the discourse and the challenges that we're facing on the campuses. So format-wise, as all of you know who've been with us in the past, Alex will talk for about a half hour. Then we will go into Q&A. Q&A will be via the chat. All you got to do is type in your questions via the chat, and we will get to all of your questions in a timely fashion. As always, I apologize in advance if we don't get to your questions. Feel free to write us after the webinar, and we'll do our best to respond, as always, as quick as we can. So really, without further ado, Alex, welcome once again, and the virtual floor is now yours.
Great, thank you. Well, hello to everyone. Welcome. Thank you for being here. I hope everybody had a good summer, and summer's not quite over yet. There's still a few more days, so after we're done here, please go out and enjoy yourselves in the sunshine, because that's an important thing. I want to begin with sort of by framing things a little bit in terms of where we are now. BDS Monitor will be out, landing with a giant thud in your mailboxes probably Monday, with a long list of events that are not good. So I want to try and step back, as I sometimes do at the beginning of the academic year, and frame things and ask where we might be now and how we got here. And the most striking thing to me is the contrast with 1 year ago. A year ago, before the presidential election, everyone knew that, and before the presidential election and almost a year since October 7th, everyone knew that things were broken and that institutions were responding badly to all sorts of challenges, universities and corporations, and that the challenges of campus anti-Semitism and corporate DEI and international anti-Semitism were only getting worse, but very little seemed to be getting done to remedy these situations, even to be honest about the nature of these situations, and much less their sources. And I think a year on from that, we're in a very different place, in large part for better and for worse. And I say that advisedly, for better and for worse, because of the election of Donald Trump and and the new administration, which took office in January of this year, so 7 months into this administration. And both actively, proactively, and reactively, we're in a very different place with respect to specifically anti-Semitism, BDS, how institutions and how the government in particular deals with these situations. And we can debate whether this is the government's response has been proper, or a proper reaction, an overreaction, and a series of illegal maneuvers. But in the final analysis, we're in a very different place now than we were a year ago. Excuse me. So let me go over a couple of things that I think were at least surprising to me, and which, again, frame where we are this year in terms of BDS, anti-Semitism, and so on. No one a year ago, and I say this with a fair degree of confidence, as someone who has observed been a close observer of higher education for a very long time. No one a year ago quite understood how fragile the economics and the general social position of academia is. No one quite understood the extent to which the entire enterprise, what I call the higher education industrial complex, was propped up by scads of federal funding, including biomedical and STEM research, science, technology, engineering, and so on. This has been obviously an area where the Trump administration has targeted using anti-Semitism as a lead issue, a critical issue. The lack of response by academic institutions, high-profile academic institutions in particular, Harvard, Columbia, UCLA, and so on, and withholding monies from the National Institutes of Health in particular, and National Endowment for the Humanities, and other federal sources, Department of Defense, and so on. No one really understood how much money and the impact of all this money was to the system as a whole, coupled with the reliance of the industry, and it's an industry, on the 1.1 or 1.2 million international students who come to the United States every year and pay full tuition, thereby subsidizing these institutions. No one understood really the extent to which the subsidies that were implicit in the tax-free status of these corporations, and they are corporations, contributed to a variety of circumstances. Administrative bloat, people have pointed out for a long time. People pointed really in the last 5 to 10 years at the incredible growth of DEI related sub-industries, cultures within academic institutions. And suddenly, when these monies were yanked away, billions of dollars in research funding frozen, the whole system, the fragility was there for everyone to see and understand for the first time, that these are artificial economies that were propped up to the on the basis of taxpayer dollars to a large extent, not exclusively, of course. Harvard has an endowment of $54 billion, and that's a very convenient number to point at, as everyone has for a very long time, certainly since the new administration has come along. But what does $54 billion mean? It's not $54 billion in a checking account in the bank. It's $54 billion that's spread around in thousands and thousands of different accounts and endowments, earmarked for this, earmarked for that, managed very carefully and quite successfully by professional money managers. And that's at the very, very top of the industry. Going down the ranks of the industry, it's very different situation. The liquidity crisis produced by the cutoff of research funds is something quite profound, because these are corporations which have invested in all sorts of different vehicles, real estate not least of all, that are not always cash friendly, or easily can be translated into easily accessible cash. The cash flow issue of the higher education industrial complex became clear when the federal government put the squeeze on the industry over the issue of anti-Semitism. That's the lead issue. But the real issue is, I don't think, and this is my personal opinion, I think the real issue is DEI and hiring discrimination across the industry, and the various federal cases that have been brought against, most recently, George Mason University in Virginia, also against UCLA, also against Harvard, also against a slew of other institutions, have shown that hiring within this industry violates any kind of equal opportunity standard, that all these corporations, very much through their DEI infrastructures and HR, which are glorified muscular HR structures on steroids, very much set about re-engineering the professoriate and the management of American colleges and universities on racial and gender bases, which worked not coincidentally to damage the interests of American Jewish students and Israeli students and faculty as well, because this is a group that this is a the HR component is a sector that is uniformly hostile to American Jews and to Israelis, because it is uniformly conforming to the oppressor-oppressed ideology of DEI. Well, all this is very much under challenge now. And again, one of the things that I think we could not have predicted, at least I didn't predict, are the incredible downsizing, the right sizing of the sector as a whole. Now, everybody knew that the demographic cliff, the supply of American teenagers going to college, was going to be dropping off in the 2020s and certainly later. This has already happened, and people have woken up to realize that this is already here. It's not coming in 2027. It's not coming in 2030. It's here now. It's already happened. No one quite realized the dependence of institutions, particularly high-profile institutions like Columbia and Harvard, but also other institutions which rely on 30, 40, 50% of their student body being foreign students, who again have been a source of anti-Jewish and anti-Israel bias and agitation. And over the summer, and certainly since the Trump administration took office, there have been a number of cause celebs about individuals like Mahmoud Khalil, the professional 18-year undergraduate at Columbia, who was arrested and then, turned into a martyr figure, and who will be speaking today or tomorrow, I think, at the University of Michigan alongside Ilhan Omar. No one could have predicted, really, I think, the extent to which the Democratic Party would have gone to bat for foreign students, including and especially those who are resolutely anti-Israel, resolutely anti-Semitic. The administration has revoked about 6,000 visas for international students. 200 to 300 apparently are for national security threats. The remainder are for things like DUIs, fraud, theft, assault, and so on. So actual criminal behavior. And this too has become a cause celeb for many advocates, partly because it's an industry, and partly because, as I've said in these broadcasts before, there is a particular political economy. It's an artificial economy that is behind so much of what we see, and so much of it is supported by the federal government. We had a very good indication of this back at the very beginning of the year, January, February, March, when the USAID was dismantled. And there was a lot of tumult about children starving in Africa, when it actually turns out that 80% of the money allocated for famine relief and so on in Africa actually goes to consultants in Northern Virginia, and so on. The USAID supported something on the order of 8,000 different media and NGO entities around the world. So there's a whole ecosystem that the US government, the US taxpayer, excuse me, was supporting. And this was dismantled, and it was the end of free speech. It was the end of healthcare in Africa. It was the rise of authoritarianism, and so on. And a lot of those things really haven't come to pass. But there is an economy, a political economy that has to a degree been defunded. And the same thing is happening now with the DEI industry, and various NGOs, some of which are, all of which really are intimately connected with the higher education industrial complex. Institutions such as the Kennedy School of Government and the School of Public Health here and there all receive money from USAID, National Institutes of Health, to promote DEI-related kinds of projects, propagate this ideology of oppressor and oppressed, milk the American taxpayer, and in many cases support flat out anti-Semitic and anti-Israel enterprises, NGOs that are connected in the case of Gaza directly with Hamas, but also with other kinds of the political wing of other Palestinian and terrorist organizations. So it's an artificial economy, and it has three ideological focuses on DEI, transgender ideology, and Gaza. Everything is paid for in one way or another, and removing the funding from the university, or threatening the funding of the university, forcing them to settle with large settlements. A couple $100 million here, a couple $100 million there, $200 million, I think, from Colombia. And this, of course, created outrage among observers. But the reality is that these corporations were being treated exactly like other corporations that other branches of the federal government, for example, the Securities and Exchange Commission, would take towards corporations that were shown to be violating various sorts of discrimination regulations. So you pay a fine, you get on with it. In the case of universities, you get your research funding back. But billions of dollars were cut, and I will try to. Do we have? I'll post in the chat for a link to a very nice database that some folks put together, which details all of the funding grants. And everybody can go through these things and see how many hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars were aimed at, in particular, DEI sorts of projects. Not DEI in terms of let's do something specifically to address this problem, but let's study this problem. Let's create institutions and infrastructures to address the problem, not to actually bring in research, disadvantaged communities into research. But let's stay on the theme of political economy and the theme of, again, to understand where we are at this point, and how it's changed since last year, and who pays for it and who benefits from it. Throughout the campaign, presidential campaign, and even before, everyone was very, very accustomed to talking about the wokeism and the woke left, which at that point, everybody understood where it was coming from. But really since the inauguration, there's the phenomenon that's emerged, and it's a very serious one, is this idea of the woke right. Everybody knows about Tucker Carlson and Candace Owens and Nick Fuentes and characters like that, these kind of lunatic influencers, all of whom are now bought and paid for, probably by Qatar. We know that that in the case of Carlson, the company that essentially he works for is funded by a Gulf businessman. Characters like Marjorie Taylor Greene, who is, in my opinion, an out and out kind of lunatic. The woman who discovered the Jewish space laser conspiracy, but who purports to speak for a portion of the Make America Great MAGA right wing. There is very clearly an engineered effort that has gone on in the last, in 2025, and has roots before certainly, to move these people into anti-Trump positions and specifically anti-Israel and anti-Jewish positions. Now, the case of Candace Owens, who literally believes the world is flat and that the Star of David is a satanic figure, that defines one edge. In terms of Tucker Carlson, it's more Nazi revisionism that the United States should have really sided with Nazi Germany in World War II. All of this obviously is aimed at Israel and the Jewish community and the American Jewish community in particular, to break up whatever support there is on the political right and the cultural right that President Trump has. It's clearly engineered. It's not entirely clear by whom. It's much more clear from the left, because there we have seen and we've been able to dissect the USAID, NGO, United Nations kinds of connections for funding. This huge web of anti-Israel NGOs and organizations that exist within the human rights industrial complex, as I call it. And the connections there with the democratic political structure are also very clear. That, if you look at a place like California, where money donated to fire relief in early 2025 was channeled by the governor and the mayor of Los Angeles, Karen Bass, to NGOs that help disadvantaged communities improve their media profiles and completely unrelated things like that. You have a sense of how this system works. So from the Republican side, the money largely seems to be coming from outside of the country and outside the system. It's not entirely clear how it works. From the Democratic side, it comes from within the system. It comes within it's largely taxpayer money and to some extent foundation money. All of this has impacted politics in tremendous ways. The impacts on right-wing politics, Republican politics, difficult to quantify, easy to overstate, but the effort is clearly to reduce support for Israel. On the left-wing side, the impacts are very clear, and you have today, at this moment, or earlier this morning, the Democratic National Committee voting on a series of resolutions, including accusing Israel of genocide and demanding that arms sales be cut off to Israel. The changes are palpable. The rise of Zoran Mamdani within as the Democratic candidate, the Democratic Socialists taking over the Democratic Party in a number of major cities, not least of all New York, or becoming the dominant factor, is a manifestation of this. And Mamdani is a very good example of someone who has no qualifications, no interests, except basically promoting communism and Islam. Similar case in Minneapolis, Omar Fateh, the Democratic Socialist candidate who's running as a Democrat on the basis of massive fraud within the primary, which nobody seems to really want to cover outside of Minnesota. These are synthetic politics. These are artificial politics being represented as grassroots politics. If you look at Mamdani's supporters, they are white liberals from the ages of, 20 to 40 who make something like 75 to $175,000 a year. These are people who are downwardly mobile or who are stuck economically, who are the products of the university system. So they're already good progressives ideologically with a kind of innate hostility to Israel, who are not a majority, but who somehow believe in miraculous economics, like everything is going to be free. And you find this repeated in a number of major urban centers. When we see the impact in Los Angeles, San Francisco is now getting over this with a Democratic centrist mayor. Minneapolis, Seattle is still a nightmare. Portland is still a nightmare. Boston, and so on. But this is the product of both, again, artificial politics and a kind of weird demographic economic politics that is unique. And so we see now a lot of polls and that which purport to indicate that support for Israel is dropping precipitously, certainly on the left, and certainly within Democrats, and certainly within younger people, but also on the right. My observation about this is now and has always been that every poll is an influence operation. And we've seen this, I've seen this, and dissected this in print a number of times on the political left, the Democratic Party operatives through their, Jewish wings running polls, which come up with the right result that say Jews are moving away from Israel, Netanyahu, or whatever. It doesn't mean that there isn't a problem. I think there are problems, but you have to not exaggerate. You have to take all these things in perspective, and with a very, very critical eye, because everything is bought and paid for. On the other hand, what we see in European politics, which is now, since the Gaza war, and certainly in 2025, impacting actual politics and economics and street violence in Britain and in France and in Germany and in Belgium and the Netherlands and Sweden and Norway, and to a slightly lesser extent in Italy and certainly in Spain. We see that that countries with Muslim populations above 5% and going up to over 10% in the case of France and probably Britain also. That these are there really are mass movements at the street level, some of which are being bought and paid for by foreign powers, along with the street violence. Very important case today. Australia this morning expelled the Iranian ambassador after having determined that at least 2 terrorist attacks on Jewish facilities in Australia in 2024 were carried out by Iranian Revolutionary Guards. So some of this street level stuff is being ginned up semi-organically through funding, and some of it is actual street violence being undertaken by foreign agents. That's coming to America. It's here in America. We saw 2 murders over the summer of Jews by a Free Palestine supporter. Well, three murders. The attempted murders of a number more. That's here. It's now. It's happening. It's only going to intensify. And there are complex sociological reasons why particular people get involved with this, but there is also state support by outside actors for the movements as a whole. The Chinese Communist Party, we know that they support the People's Forum and Code Pink. Qatar, we know that their involvement with universities and so on. Um, we know, for example, Greta Thunberg and her sudden shift from climate advocacy to Gaza advocacy. Everybody's on the dime somewhere, somehow. And masses of people who have no other convictions, who are otherwise empty individuals, follow these things with a kind of religious conviction. I think that's extremely dangerous. And that's obviously developed over a long period of time. It's not new to 2025. Where it's going to go, I don't really know. At the same time, um, mainline churches are collapsing, but traditional churches, including Latin Mass Catholic churches in the United States and in Europe, are experiencing, excuse me, big upswings. And we also see increasing resistance to Muslim politics and migrant politics in Europe and especially in the UK. So all of these trends, all these factors are working. None of them are particularly advantageous for Jews or for Israel, but they are all working at cross currents with one another. And they've come into focus in much, much greater detail since 2025. Many of these things no one could really have understood or imagined. Everything is connected somehow. And I used to tell my classes, everything is connected, even the things that aren't connected, because you have to explain why they aren't connected, and that's a connection. So that brings me to the end, and I'll just say predictions I don't really know. I think there's a an argument to be made that a lot of the anti-Semitic violence and the anti-Semitic street expressions are potentially a sort of weird boom and bust sort of phenomenon. I also think that more likely it will be enduring, and that hostility to Israel, even when the Gaza war is ending, whether it's in 2 weeks or 2 months, let's hope it's sooner rather than later, will be enduring for a period of years. None of this is exactly new. Those of us who remember the 1982 Lebanon War, for example, um, there are very strong echoes of all sorts of conflicts. The genocide allegation, I got on, Google Books a couple months ago, and I could trace it back to 1948. That's when the allegations that Jews were committing genocide against the Arabs seems to have begun. There's nothing new, but the intensity, the speed, the pervasiveness, thanks to mass media, the internet, thanks to the deracination and lack of other religious convictions on the part of so much of the world's population, and to Muslim migration all over the world, and innate hostility. Um, so I think we're in for a rough ride. I think this year is going to be an interesting ride. And having been wrong about my predictions in so many ways in the past, I don't think I want to lay out a timeline for anything. Um, but I think we're in a new place. And as I always say, clarity. We should be thankful, if nothing else, for clarity, and that we have much more clarity now about where we stand within the American and global political landscapes. Um, and we have to act accordingly, however whatever that means. So let me stop there. Let's try, excuse me, take some questions. Pardon me.
Great. Well, thank you for that extensive and obviously exhaustive, explanation.
Exhausting,
Exhaustive.
exhausting.
And as you said correctly, nothing is new. We have seen all of this, and we're seeing all of it again and again. As Alex said, the floor is open for questions. As people are thinking about what to ask and digesting everything you said, let me take the prerogative. I'll ask the first question and start us off. And you alluded to that at the beginning. So with all that's happening in Europe, and the movement to parachute a Palestinian state through all these international institutions who have only harmed the situation, but you're seeing, this growth of these movements that are playing out. How is that? I mean, and obviously we spoke about this a little bit. You spoke about, how it all relates to the campus discourse, but in particular, in this attempt to try to what I would say, revert back to a pre-10/7 reality with this kind of call for Palestinian statehood on the heels of all the manufactured crises that are coming out of Hamas and its affiliates. When we're talking about higher ed and where it's going and the discourse that we're seeing, and I think that your last point about the use of these trigger words vis-a-vis genocide, what are you seeing, as far as how this is going to play out in the fall?
Well, we'll break it down a little bit. The the demand or the statement by uh, Emmanuel Macron, France, and Keir Starmer of Britain, and whatever the corrupt socialist guy's name is in Spain, I'm forgetting right now. He's going to be indicted. His wife has been indicted. That the promise to recognize a Palestinian state, in the case of Britain, using this as a threat, we're going to recognize a Palestinian state unless you let in more aid to Gaza. I mean, that's kind of bizarre, ridiculous thinking. Has predictably backfired. It collapsed a hostage negotiation deal, ceasefire negotiation deal rather, that was on the verge of being concluded. It it emboldened Hamas. It emboldened the Palestinian Authority. It rewarded terrorism and intransigence. It set back the cause of peace, and it was done on the basis of um, largely European fears of their own Arab streets, the Muslim voters. Um, so it backfired. Whether or not in September at the General Assembly there's really going to be these these announcements isn't clear. They'll probably say something, come up with some kind of weaselly walking back, but it represents the indulgence of intransigent domestic populations in France, Britain, Spain, and so on. Interestingly, the German Prime Minister uh, Merz did not go along with this, and he's said that it's not the time, and nor of course did the U.S. And there's an evolving diplomatic kerfuffle between Macron and the American ambassador Charles Kushner, Jared's dad. Um, it's my conclusion is that the French don't really play politics very well anymore. Um, how that in particular is going to echo or be reflected or something in the campus, I don't really know. I mean, these when you argue with SJPs and folks like that, which I try not to do very often, except every once in a while on Twitter, I'll get irritated and get into an argument with these idiots. Um, they're always a little bit behind the times, but their real issue is not recognizing a state. Their issue is not a ceasefire at all. Their issue is that the legitimacy of Israel is non-existent. It's always been non-existent. Jews are not a people with rights to a nation of their own. They're at best, a religion that should be accorded some kind of rights as a religion. And somebody, I think it was the DSA, the Democratic Socialists of America, had their convention in August, where they reaffirmed their commitment to the Palestinian, what they see as the Palestinian uh, uh, sort of cause, including the right of return, including so no Israel, including the right of resistance, so yes to terrorism, um, and the idea that every Jew, that only Jews who were present in Palestine prior to the Zionist movement can stay. Everybody has to go back, and this is obviously related in some way to old style Palestinian movements, but also to settler colonial ideology, which sees the existence of settler states as inherently illegitimate. And something I didn't talk about, but we see this in lots of countries. Australia was a good example. Over the summer, there was a big protest in earlier in August where 100,000 people came out on the streets, paid by somebody. Somebody paid for the signs, organized by somebody. Um, but in addition to the idea that Israel is illegitimate and there's a famine and a genocide in Gaza, it's the whole idea that Australia is illegitimate. You see this in Canada. Canada is illegitimate. Everybody has to go back to wherever. Now, obviously, this is contradictory, to say the least, with the idea that all migrants to Euro-American countries are welcome, and that somehow, if you're a Pakistani migrant to Britain, you have more legitimacy than a person who's English, whose family has been there since the Bronze Age. I mean, it makes no sense, but it doesn't have to make sense because it's a religion. These things, religions don't make sense. Um, so I think we're going to see more of that kind of more of these kinds of things in the fall, and the contradictions are going to just keep getting higher and higher and higher. And parenthetically, for disciplines like and I guess I should have mentioned this at the beginning, part of the economic collapse, and I think we can call it an economic collapse of the universities, is that there's tons of layoffs, but not only of administrative staff, but programs have been frozen. So the University of Chicago, which is a bellwether, which is really it was the first American research university at the end of the 19th century on the German model. Well, it's frozen all graduate admissions, except if you want to get a terminal master's degree in something. So no more PhD students this year and maybe in the future. Partly because there's no place to place all these PhDs. Um, the local reason is because the university has massively mismanaged its money, um, which isn't necessarily the fault of the humanities and social sciences. But what happens then is that these disciplines get smaller and smaller and smaller, and the hostility towards Israel and Jews in America and settler colonials gets greater and greater and greater because it becomes a self-perpetuating kind of petri dish. Maybe that's going to change because you're not going to have so many graduate students anymore. Now, they're going to take their hostility out into the wider
That's true.
world, and I don't know what they're going to do with it, but I hope they stay away from me. So,
Well, so that's a good point, Alex. I mean, and you and I have talked and written about this before. I mean, all of this, we all frame this in terms of religiosity. It is a religion, and the campuses are operating in this religious narrative. Some of the I'm just some of the questions that have come up now. Maybe this is something worthwhile to discuss. It's something you and I have written about of late with all of these, attempts by the universities to have settlements with the government. What does reform in higher education look like? You and I came up with this white paper of some,
yeah, you should put the link in the chat.
I
We
will
should
do
do
that.
more of that kind of
Right,
chat link
right,
stuff.
and I think that, but it's worth highlighting. Obviously not the full paper itself, but I mean, I think that at least some of the recommendations that we gave, as far as what are big picture changes that can happen as it relates to, reform in higher ed, as we're looking at the kind of metrics of success, and what this all looks like?
Reform in higher ed, I think, is already going on, and we just don't kind of appreciate it and understand it. And it has a positive and negative component. The negative component is that more attention has been focused on, let's call them top line universities, Harvard, Columbia, UCLA, Stanford, so on and so on. And the humanities and social sciences there are deeply, I don't want to say uniformly, but deeply kind of infused with all sorts of ideologies. Not not coincidentally, these are some of the institutions that the Trump administration has chosen to target, but also these are institutions where hostility towards Jews, Israelis, Christians, supporters of Israel, supporters of America and the West is at the highest. And these fields are, and we're talking about a lot of fields, not simply Middle Eastern studies. We're talking about English. We're talking about sociology, to name only three of the worst. But what's happening is that there is, I think, very clearly a migration going on. We saw this at the beginning after 10/7, but now I think we can really talk about it. I don't have the numbers, but students voting with their feet and moving to other institutions, Southern institutions. And there's a very public kind of confrontation that emerged in August between the presidents of Princeton and the president of Vanderbilt. Um, President of Princeton has been we've got to fight Trump until the end, die on the barricades. President of Vanderbilt has been very, can't allow anti-Israel, anti-Semitic kinds of ideology and anti-American ideology to take over the institution and for this to be manifest on the ground. Not coincidentally, again, Vanderbilt and other Southern institutions, University of Florida, have not have seen increases in the number of applications, including by Jewish and Christian students. Whether this is going to turn into a long-term trend is not clear. So part of the answer to how to reform is leadership from the top. That sets the tone, that frankly keeps faculty and students and administrators in line to a greater degree. Now, we can certainly propose other kinds of institutional mechanical solutions. I've spoken about this before. The University of Minnesota, not Minnesota, University of Michigan had a $250 million DEI enterprise that was essentially an independent unit out of control of the trustees or anybody. And its job was to support graduate students, place faculty members that it would fund into departments, and then who would then take over the departments. That's been dismantled. The effects are still with us. I think, as we said in this white paper, I think the real issue is a public debate, a public reckoning about what colleges and universities are for, what the liberal arts are for, and how they're going to be constructed, by whom, for whom, and how they're going to be funded. And I think, frankly, some of the answers are not very pretty, because higher education is a massively overbuilt enterprise. And the humanities and social sciences are massively overbuilt. And I say this with enormous regret. And they do a lousy job. K through 12 does a lousy job in America at vast expense. So unless we start looking at all the different pieces, And the way we do it in America is for one area to be addressed or targeted or criticized, and then for everybody to scream at each other back and forth for months and months and months. That's what passes for measured debate in America. I'm afraid with polarized voices on on all sides and with very little middle ground. So you can read, hysterical screeds really anywhere anywhere you like, which talk about how the world is ending. A world is ending. The liberal arts education world, post-war world that existed from 1945 until 2000 or 2010 or something is over. And the students have walked away from the humanities and social sciences. Students have walked away from reading literature. Students have walked away from and now with artificial intelligence, even those who have STEM degrees can't get jobs. I don't have the answer for that or for lots and lots of things. I tend to think that smaller and local might be a solution, but we're so accustomed to too big to fail. Um, and we spend so much energy trying to bail out gigantic institutions that need to fail, um, and be put under new management somehow. Again, what that actually looks like on the ground, in terms of faces, in terms of money, in terms of numbers, I don't really know. Um, but you know,
But there also have to be obviously as you and I talk about, and you said correctly, I mean, obviously the desire to make these changes. I mean, the other day we saw, former president of Florida, Ben Sass, who, wrote a whole, piece about, trying to get back to basics as far as what the universities and institutions should be doing and not be doing, and looking at the how Jews are treated on campuses and things of the like. Obviously, these are are nice, hopeful ideas that should take place, but obviously there has to be the will, by these institutions, and obviously you are seeing, to your earlier point, a difference between the geography as far as where these institutions
yeah,
are located and who are actually capable of making those changes. Your point about Vanderbilt should be very well taken, and other places in the South where there's a clear correlation of the politics of the state and the politics of the institutions that are actually enforcing this.
yeah. Look, um, uh, uh, that's very true, and it's very important. So last year at this time, I was in South Carolina. I had long conversations with the Attorney General, and with the governor of South Carolina at an event. I don't usually hang out with these kinds of people. And the point that they made is that South Carolina is different. The culture of South Carolina, the people, partly because they are who they are, and the demographics, the religious background of people. And that's all very important. If you go to North Carolina, it's completely different. The atmosphere there is completely different. The local politics are completely different at the state level, at the local level. There's a relentless hostility towards Israel at all these levels, and massive infiltration by Islamists into state and local politics in those places. But all these things are very fragile. Um, I don't follow Florida politics very carefully. I know that there's a, a gubernatorial election coming up this year, next year, sometime. Um, so what happens when Ron DeSantis goes to his next job, and who comes in? Everything is easily reversible unless you somehow get it into law. And even then, colleges and universities and the higher education industry in general has remarkable talent for circumventing, manipulating, outright lying. So whatever progress we have now, or think that we have now, is very fragile, and a lot of it is electoral, and it plays out at different speeds. And the New York City election in November is going to be very, very interesting, and it has very important ramifications for not only those not only those of us who live in or around the city, but nationally, and because it's going to be a model of systematic mismanagement, financial mismanagement, mismanagement of the schools, putting the school unions 100% in charge, teachers unions in New York and in America, especially places like Philadelphia, especially places like Seattle and Portland. These progressive communities are relentlessly hostile to Israel and to Jews because it's all about white privilege, and creating and attacking the oppressed structure. Excuse me. If that happens, if that's fully institutionalized in New York, it'll be a disaster. Policing. Um, we know what policing in Portland and Seattle and Minneapolis and Los Angeles looks like. And the implications for New York, where the Jewish community is the largest in the country, are terrible, and so on and so on and so on. So that plays out along one timeline. Universities play out along another sort of timeline, and there are obviously convergences. Um, what we don't have are national conversations. What we don't have are a lot of people who are ready to sit and listen to one another and come up with, calm, have measured conversations, and to have try and come up with compromise and consensus.
That's a good
What's
place.
it for?
Right.
What are colleges and universities for?
Right. And that's a good recommendation, which of course, we've been advocating and talking about and trying to, talk about all of that. Unfortunately, I'm just keeping an eye on the clock, Alex, and obviously there is much to unpack,
Right.
and we're not done. Obviously, this is only the beginning, and, be prepared for a roller coaster as always of emotions and politics that are, they're
Right.
all,
And I would say to everybody also, keep your head on a swivel,
yeah.
because it's violence has dramatically escalated since October 7th, and I think that's going to take a while to to fade away. We hope it does, and but we should also say there's a webinar tomorrow.
Exactly. So, we have a busy week on tap this week, so if you like what you heard today, or, obviously,
Well, it's not going to be me tomorrow, so
right, but there'll be a
it's
lot,
off
there's
the hook.
a lot more to discuss. So tomorrow, as Alex mentioned, tomorrow we're going to be hosting Professor Jeffrey Korn, who will be, who's an expert on, who's a law expert who will deal with what's going on in Gaza and dissecting a lot of the legitimacy of the war in Gaza and dealing with proportionality and the occupational accusations and everything along those lines. And Korn really has done a lot of work on this topic, so worthwhile to hear. So please join us back tomorrow. As always, we are grateful for your support all around. We need your support to keep on doing the kind of critical work that we're doing and putting out these informations and these conversations. To Alex's point, it's not always happening, and so we need to continue putting the pressure on all levels, and making sure at the local, at the federal, at the state level that these conversations are being happening so we can improve and change the environment. So with that, I mean, as always, we thank you for joining us. Hope to see you tomorrow. As always, I thank Alex for joining me this afternoon, and we will talk soon. Have a great day.
Take care, everybody.